Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Alone podcast. Once again, the same thing every week. I'm super excited for today's guest and actually really excited for today's guest. This is someone that I was planning on waiting actually quite a while to reach out to until the show had been around a little bit. But I got, I don't know, crazy or bored or whatever one day and decided to just go for it. And so here we are. So super excited to announce that today's guest is Jordan Jonas. I don't think Jordan needs much introduction to anybody, but Jordan was obviously a participant on season 6 of Alone. So Jordan, I'm super excited to have you today. One thing though is you did mention before we started hitting record that you've been on the Joe Rogan podcast. And so now I'm all like uncomfortable and nervous and self-conscious.
You're doing way better already.
Yeah, well, there you go. Take that, Joe. Maybe you can give me some tips afterwards, or probably even just take over the show because you've got way more podcast cred than I have.
No problem. No, yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's always fun to talk with people that are, that enjoy the show and similar things, and yeah, good stuff. I hope it goes well for you doing the podcast and get more
Thank
people
you.
on and all that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's funny, as I was looking through your stuff, as I was kind of, I don't want to say stalking because that's kind of weird, but as I was looking through your...
As you do on the internet.
Yeah, right. We've all got a little bit of stalker in us, I guess, anymore, but as I was going through your stuff, I had noticed a post that you did a little while ago that really resonated with me and what I'm trying to do. And so again, thank you for taking the time to come on to this, pretty small show at this point, but growing. You'd made a post and you were spending some time with Clay and Nate, both from season 8. And on your post, you'd introduced them as participants on Alone. But then you acknowledged that, for Clay and Nate, that they're probably better defined by, I think you called it, their attributes and life experiences than their time on Alone. And that really resonated with me because that's, that idea that you put into that is what I'm going for with this show, right? Is that the people on Alone, obviously their time on Alone was great and we all loved getting to see and hear what you all were doing. But there really is a person behind that TV personality. So that just was something that really resonated with me.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, totally. We're got a lot more that defines us all, probably than just the show, although it was a fun and eventful few months. So
yeah, well,
it made for some good stories. But
I'm sure, and maybe we'll see where this goes today. But I really want to start actually not even talking about you. And so another thing I found as I was looking through your stuff is you'd made a post a while ago, and you were honoring your ancestors, and you'd mentioned basically that it seems like your family had survived a genocide in the Middle East, and then they immigrated to France, and then at some point with Nazi occupation of France, I don't know if that was post-war or right at the beginning, your family again left and picked up and came to the States, and here you all are today, I'm assuming, or I guess most of you are who came. Can you talk about your family history a little bit and maybe shed some light on what you were talking about in that post?
Yeah, it's a big, I think I probably think about my family and my ancestors probably every day. There's for whatever reason, my personality or whatever, it's something that I think about. I'm really grateful for. We had specifically, I can go into both sides of my family, but specifically on my dad's side of the family, they're Assyrians from the Middle East, which is, that they're traditionally like a Christian minority group in northern Iraq and northwestern Iran and southern Turkey, and so kind of in that general region. And they've so they're kind of the indigenous people there. And in 1915, basically, and around that time when the Ottoman Empire was kind of falling apart, there was a big nationalist movement there that was basically like, Turkey for the Turks type thing. They wanted to get rid of all the minorities, and specifically like religious minorities. So they came in, and it's known as the Armenian genocide, but it wasn't just Armenians, it was also Assyrians and Greeks and everybody that pretty much got wiped out from what is modern day Turkey. And it was my own grandparents, my family lineage is kind of spread out because my grandmother was fairly old when she had my dad, and then my dad was the youngest of 11 kids, and so it was actually, although most people my age, it would probably be their great grandparents. It was actually just my grandparents that went through that Armenian genocide. So my grandma was her dad, when the Ottomans came in, they actually were all lived in northwestern Iran, is where my family's from. But at the time, in the war, as World War One, the Turks kind of came in there, and when and I took my my grandma's dad out to be shot, and all the kind of the men of the village they took out to be shot, and then the women and the children they drove off into the desert, kind of on a death march. And my grandma had 7 siblings, and her mom, of course, and they got driven out into the desert, and only my grandma and one of her sisters and her mom survived. So their 6 siblings all died. And it was brutal. There's all the rape and pillage that goes along with that, and so they lived through something completely horrendous. And then
Sorry, I'm going to jump in. Were they taken out and left, and then they had to kind of make their
no, it
way
was
to
like
somewhere, or like the
it
baton
was
style, they
kind of
marched to a place?
it was kind of like a march to nowhere. They kind of just took them out into the Syrian desert and marched them until they died. Basically, hypothetically, there was an end point, but nobody ever got there really. And when they did, there were no supplies or anything like that. So, yeah, it was a pretty effective way to just kind of get rid of them, but to be able to say to the European powers, like, oh, it's just an exile. We're not killing them. We're just,
We were trying to take them
moving them
somewhere.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but with no water, no food, no nothing, and they'd actually hired a bunch of the released criminals to head up the operation. So, you can imagine anyway the
Yeah.
chaos. And my great grandmother, when her youngest child died, she like kind of fell down in the desert and was like, I can't go on any farther. And so my grandma and her sister, my grandma was 13 at the time, her sister was a little older, and they kind of dragged the grandma to the feet, left the baby, and like kind of begged their mom to keep going, and they did. And kind of miraculously, they stumbled off and stumbled onto a British military camp, and were rescued. So they did somehow, one of few that survived. I'm sure my great grandmother was traumatized the rest of her life, which I don't think lasted very much longer. And so was grandma's sister. So practically she was orphaned, pretty much on her own. And my grandpa's story was real similar. He was in a village. The Turks were coming in and burning down the whole village, and his dad was also in a wheelchair. Was in a wheelchair, and basically shoved all the money they had in my grandpa's coat and told him to run for it and don't look back. And so grandpa like took off out the back door when they were coming in the front door, and he turned around just to see his dad's house up in flames with his dad in it. And then he never did find his sister, never knew what happened to her. And he just ran and ran, and then eventually got to a refugee kind of encampment, and then was eventually taken in by some Jesuit priests, and they kind of raised him as their own. So both of them were orphaned basically, and pretty crazy situation. They eventually met in Baghdad and got married, and then emigrated to France and to Marseille right before World War II. And then of course that happened, and the Nazi invasion and all that, and they have all kinds of crazy, my aunts and uncles all have crazy stories of that. My dad was younger, so he was born after the war, but some of my aunts were in the French Resistance, and they have all the stories of
Oh, that's cool.
getting getting breaking into some noodle factory and getting some food for their family. And,
Maybe I need to
just
hang
a
up
lot
with
of
you
it.
and call your aunts.
Yeah, you probably should. They're much more interesting. Now they, anyway, crazy history. All that to say, when I finally come around, after that in the 50s, they immigrated to the U.S. and loved it because, everywhere else they had been from was pretty rough. And so they were, my dad didn't teach me French, didn't teach me any Middle Eastern languages, Aramaic or anything. They're like, you're American. You're an American now. So, anyway, they love it here. But anyway, that history to me is really valuable because it does put so much into perspective. Anything that I'm going through, including alone or something like that, it's just
Yeah.
like, well, I just have nothing to complain about. And then not only that, but I was never a lot of that history I had to kind of dig up from them and hear from them and get them to talk about. And what I was never taught was, oh, we don't like the Turks, or we don't like, like I was never like taught anything from an angle of hate. They were always just my big happy aunt and uncle family,
Yeah,
big
that's
happy family reunions, lots of fun. Like I didn't meet my grandparents; they died before I came around. But there's some old videos of them, and you can just see they're just happy people, like getting around, eating rabbit together with the family. You just see the joy, and it translated down to my dad, who endured his own degree of suffering, and it's like, man, but they all did it with a joy, which was really profound. And so that's a big lesson that I have taken from that, and that I remind myself of,
yeah,
and so
you seem to be a little bit of a happy person. Pretty happy
yeah,
go lucky.
definitely. I think it's just focusing on what we're grateful for. It's always things that can be improved, but I really, it's a big part of who I am and how I
Yeah, no,
choose to go through life, I guess.
I want to say it's a great story. I mean, it's not a great story, but I mean the outcome
Right, it
obviously
is.
is
That's how it is. And
it's
everybody
yeah.
really, most people have at some point in their history some really tough times and hard times. And I'm sure times when we were the good guys and times when we were the bad guys and everything in between. So it's like,
Yeah, don't dig
it's
too deep, right?
complicated. Yeah. It's like, but, it was so recent of a history for me that it's something that I'm really easily able to tap into and relate to. And yeah, there's some real valuable lessons there that I think about often.
Yeah, that's pretty I mean that's really close for one to have that just be, like a generation or two removed for you.
Yeah.
Do you recall, and you might have said this and I just didn't pick it up. I promise I'm listening.
Uh-huh.
How do you remember or recall how old your grandmother and grandfather were when they were, simultaneously
Yeah,
walking through the desert and running to escape?
grandma was 13 and my grandpa was born in 1898, so he must have been like 17.
Okay.
So, mhm.
So pretty young.
Yeah, so they were both young, yeah, pretty young.
That is wild.
Just insane.
You mentioned the family history thing, and sometimes you're on the right or wrong side. I've got kind of a a confusing one in my family. So I've got a
Uh-huh.
American Revolution general from the British Army in my
Oh,
family, and I
right.
won't name names. I don't want to, either disgrace or because it's like equally it's like good
Maybe
for the
they were
American
good
side.
guys. Who
Yeah, yeah. But he
knows?
effectively, the story goes that, and like the historical record goes, that he couldn't give up his fine accoutrements of life from England, and so he made
Uh-huh.
his men kind of carry a four-poster bed and fine china and all of these, all of these niceties as they're literally traipsing through the forest in the
Oh, geez,
revolution.
yeah,
And because of that, they, kind of the historical record shows that, or blames basically his need for nice things as to why his army eventually had to surrender is because they were just too beat down and worn down, and he was too focused on other stuff. So there you go. We don't.
Yeah, well, we thank you for America, I
Right?
guess.
Yeah, I've often wondered. There's
Thanks,
actually a
Grandpa.
yeah, right. There's actually a mural of that surrender in the United States Capitol. And
No kidding.
so,
Oh, wow, that's
yeah,
interesting.
so we went through the Capitol. I was kind of like, man, I don't know if I should be like excited right now. Like, hey, that's my whatever. Or if I'm like, man, that's not a good legacy.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Winners write history, so you never
Well,
know.
thank you for sharing that story about your family. I hope. I mean, you mentioned obviously your grandparents have passed on, but and you said there's videos and you had to kind of pry some of this out. But is your family? Do you have these stories recorded and do you have them,
Yeah,
saved in a manner
they
that?
wrote them down at some point, so I've got a big document with yeah, a lot of their stories and stuff. Yeah, and I've had to do a lot of that, a little bit of that myself, just trying to get these stories down on it. I've even recently, even as of like last week, one of my, it was my grandpa's brother had a son who was basically our only surviving family member left in Iran, and and so he eventually became the archbishop of northern Iran there for the Assyrian church or whatever, the Catholic church over there. And and I've been hearing, but I was in the 50s and 60s when he was alive, and I've just been meeting a couple random people online, and one in New York who knew him, and have all these stories about him, which is really fascinating. So I've been hearing, still gathering, still learning some of that history, which is really kind of fun. Stuff that would have otherwise been lost, but pretty interesting stories.
Yeah, that's cool that
Yeah.
you're taking the time to track all that down. There was some family members of mine that had homesteaded, in the early 1900s and had some interesting stories that, their children, so my grandparents and great uncles, I guess, would have
Mm-hmm.
been able to record, and some really interesting stories about the West. And I had all the intentions in the world to meet up with them and record those stories and get them down, and we lost them, right? So it's kind of
Yeah,
a
that's a
good reminder
bummer.
that if
Yeah,
it's there, go get it because it's not going to be there
yeah,
forever.
yep. I had some an uncle that fought, in on Saipan and all those Pacific landings, that when I was like a young kid, probably 14 or something, he like opened up to me like he hadn't to anyone else and told me all these stories. And it was one of those things where you don't write it down at the time, but you don't know how special it is.
Yeah,
And then you lose the chance, then you forget half of it, and like, oh man, should have wrote that down. But it's,
yeah,
yeah, worth hanging on to. The history's valuable.
cool. And
You
I'm
can learn
glad
a
you're
lot
doing
from
that
it.
because I'm glad you're doing that because it's kind of it's obviously of interest to me, but those stories, I mean, for you, you've drawn a life's worth, or I guess half of a life, a third of a
Look,
life, whatever, wherever you're at in
we'll
life,
see.
you, yeah, whatever percentage it ends up being, you've drawn a
Right.
lot of strength from that, and I'm sure that your
That
children and others
was
will
a
do the
big
same.
motivation, even on going on alone. Like I was like, man, that's what I told the casting people when they were, when you're. But I was just like, I would just be. I've done so much of this stuff, living in the woods and being in Siberia and all that. Uh, but and there's just nobody there to record it, or no, there's no remembrance of it. But it'd be awesome to have a record of that, only because, like, man, what would I do to have an hour long compilation of footage of Grandpa, back in Iran, maybe before the whole genocide? Like, what
Yeah.
was his life like? Who was he? Like, that would have been fascinating. So being able to have something like that to hand down would be pretty cool. So
Yeah, it's
yeah,
interesting in talking to Britt, not to put the History Channel on blast or anything. Like I totally understand the copyright issues and everything, but for Britt, he was like,
mm-hmm.
"Man, I really want to get my extra footage from the show. I'm willing to pay
Oh
for it
yeah,
because
for sure.
how many people have one of the most seminal experiences of their lives recorded in that level of detail that you can then look back on for yourself when you need strength, or that you can give to your children and your grandchildren, and maybe in 100 years someone's looking at this going, whoa, that Jordan
Yeah.
guy was pretty cool. um so yeah.
Yeah, it totally. I'm amazed at how much footage they have that they must just sit on. I don't know what they're doing. I can't imagine they'll ever use it, but sheesh, all they would have to do is hire like a intern for $20 an hour and just release all that on YouTube.
Yeah,
Have a
right.
huge channel.
Yeah.
Maybe they're hanging on to it for something. I don't know what, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, so
it is true.
we've got your family background, and again, thank you for sharing those stories. That was deeper and I mean just super interesting. And so your family, you eventually ended up in northern Idaho. At least your
Yeah.
parents did. Is that?
Mhm. Correct. Yeah, that's where my parents met and everything, and that's where I grew up. Although I was born in Illinois, the dad was down there for work for a while, but I pretty much grew up in Idaho, and then uh, got on a farm out there, and kind of yeah, did the normal Idaho thing. We had a farm. My dad actually wasn't a big hunter or anything, so I didn't get into that early. But I really enjoyed farming and all that, and he went in the outdoors and all that kind of. But
Well, and I know that
yeah.
someone, I mean, in the future, in 2 weeks, when
Mhm.
someone is listening to this, they're going to be at home screaming, "Were they farming potatoes?" So I have to ask, were you farming potatoes? And then we'll let
No,
that
no, I
person
should
calm
say
down.
no. We just had like a small, we had cows and chickens and turkeys and you know more farm animals. My mom has a crazy garden, but we didn't do like production level crops or anything. We did grow potatoes. So yes, I guess so.
That's part of the contract, I guess, of having land in Idaho.
Stereotypically, yeah.
Yeah. All
No,
right.
but it was good. And then I, whatever, got a job picking raspberries when I was 13, and then moving irrigation lines, and then uh at a concrete factory, and then at a theme park. Just kind of doing all
Yeah.
the different jobs when I was young. And then my brother
You
at some point had what's that?
I was just say you went nomadic pretty quick, right?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. My brother got when he was 17, I was probably 12 or something. He decided to hitchhike down to Nevada, and so he took off for a summer, and then and while he was traveling, he decided hitchhiking sucked because he had to wait on other people all the time. But he stumbled across riding freight trains and ended up loving it. And so he basically got on a freight train at some time. I don't know how old he was exactly, but he's probably 18 or 19, and just did that for the next 7 or 8 years. He rode all over the country, he'd stop and work when he needed money, and then just kind of it's a very interesting uh path because you get a taste of freedom that you don't really get. It's hard to get in modern life because really all you're doing is if he invited me, to make a long story short, and I went out for a long summer with him. And
How old were you at that point?
I don't remember if I was 18 or 19, but something like that. You know, a teenager. And then I went out, and it was my first taste of the type of freedom that you get that I would only then experience later in Siberia, living with the natives, where where it's kind of, in a way, it feels like how we're meant to live. We just wake up. What are your needs? You need some food. Try to procure food. If you need you, just very, very free. There's no stressors about meetings you need to be at, or going to work at this time or that. It's all very unscheduled, very free, and it was pretty eye-opening. So after having experienced that, I think you kind of catch the bug or something. Then I went back and worked a little longer at Lighthouse Salad Dressing, but then I quit that and went down to Virginia with my brother, and we started renovating houses. But not long after that, I had heard about this. He was like a missionary guy over in Russia that was building an orphanage and needed help. And since I knew some construction stuff, I was like, I felt like that was the right thing to do. So I went over there and basically got a visa for a year and headed over there and spent the better part of that year with that guy who's just an awesome dude. But I also wanted to live with Russians, not with an American. So so he sent me to a neighboring village with this guy. He's like, well, let me call the neighbor, because I told him, hey, Justice, I'd like to live with Russian family, learn the language faster. And he's like, let me call the neighbor, in a different village. So he did, and the guy was like, oh yeah, send him over. My wife's in the hospital, and I need somebody to watch the kids. So I just showed up. I was like 21 or 22, and I'd never dealt with kids at all before, but I didn't even know the language. I had to try to feed and clothe these kids while Ura was off, at his job, and basically was spent the better part of a year just doing Russian village life, cutting hay with a sigh and whatever they do, milking the cow, all that
Yeah.
stuff. Potatoes. There's where we really grew the potatoes. Put Idaho to shame.
Yeah, Idaho's
And
faking it. Is
then
that what you're saying?
yeah, yeah. They got tractors and stuff in Idaho. It's too easy. Yeah, yeah. No, anyway, so then I kind of lived with that family. That guy had been to prison, and he had been to prison with native nomadic, he'd been in prison with a native, and he used to always tell me, hey, you gotta go meet my native buddy up north. And so eventually that guy came through to sell furs, and we got introduced, and he invited me to come live with him. And of course, by this time, the Russian guy I lived with, he really liked me, and so he would really vouch for me. He's like, man, you got to take this guy up. He's, the only good American.
He's
You got
great with kids.
yeah, great with kids. And so anyway, I went up north with the fur trapper guy, the Evenki guy, and spent a season. He showed me the ropes fur trapping, real similar to that documentary Happy People. If you haven't seen it, it's
Yeah,
worth watching.
I was gonna ask you what came first, Jordan in Siberia or Happy People?
I think, well, that's a good question. Well, what actually came first was a Russian version of Happy People, which is considerably better than the American version. What happened was that Werner Herzog bought the rights to that from a Russian filmmaker and then chopped it down into whatever it is, a 2-hour video. But
Yeah.
the original one's like 4 2-hour sections, and goes in a lot deeper, and I think they cut out a lot of good stuff. So if you can find the
I'm
English
assuming
version of the
I say is it in Russian or is there an English version of the original?
no, there is an English version, and it's worth finding because it's better than the short one. They cut out some cool stuff. So anyway, I don't know which one came first actually, but
But needless to say, you
but
didn't watch Happy People and then did the
no,
cool kid thing
I hadn't seen that. No, no, no,
okay.
I definitely not. Actually, and even meeting the natives, I didn't know people like that even lived like that until I basically got dropped off at their teepee. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
whoa, this is awesome. But but yeah, with the fur trapping, it was real similar to that. We were, relatively close to where they filmed Happy People in Siberia terms, like 500 kilometers away upriver. But
Neighbors.
they were neighbors, basically. So anyway, I got a whole, cool experience. I had done a little riding of the trains alone, but not, for like a week. But out there fur trapping was the first time I spent a good long chunk of time alone, or relative to me, it was like 5 weeks out
It's like were you running
in
your own trap
Siberia
line?
there. Yeah, setting up Ura's old traps that had kind of degraded over the years, so it was a lot of work. It'd been like a decade since anyone had trapped any of those lines, so it was like even finding the traps in the forest was tough. But yeah, I basically spent 5 weeks out there living off the land and whatever noodles we had stocked in our cabins. So a combination of both. But it was awesome, man. It was a cool experience. And that was the first time I got, you just, when you're alone that long, you really think about stuff. And I think, I mean, not to jump all around, which I guess you're going to do anyway, but I think that's why I grew when I was on alone. I really appreciated having the cameras because I had done all that fur trapping and didn't, my camera batteries died within the first hour, and that
Oh my
was it.
goodness.
And so I was like, man, I had some crazy experiences that I felt were, some life and death, this and that, falling through the ice, and just cool stuff happening. And it's just all in your memory, and you're like, man, it's such a poor conduit,
Yeah.
especially my memory. So I, anyway, when I was on alone, I was like, man, this is a cool opportunity to be able to share some of this stuff that I know that most people don't even know that I know.
Yeah, for
So
everyone else,
it
like,
was,
hey, we need more footage, and for Jordan, like, hey, bud, we don't have that many batteries and cards back at camp.
it's just the way you view it, because you could be. I basically missed the first moose due to my own stupidity in combination with cameras,
Yeah,
but had I not had a camera, I'm sure I could have got it. But it was
you didn't watch enough Remy
yeah,
Warren before you went out.
I know. Shoot, I know. I need to brush up on it. I was so out of this whole survival world, I didn't even know. I didn't know what any of that stuff was. I didn't. But no, it was anyway. I don't know where I was going with that. Just that while I was fur trapping in Siberia, it was a really neat experience. But it allowed me to appreciate later on when I would be on alone to the opportunity to record it as opposed to just having it all fizzle out of my memory.
Yeah, and of those
But it was
hours of recordings, you now have exactly 1 hour of yourself.
1 hour. So annoying. That's the big trick they have. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Oh man, this is gonna be great, and then
yeah.
it's got an hour of me complaining about moose fat. It's like, gosh dang.
Uh,
Just
and what was it, Wolverine?
kidding.
Wolverines? What was your nemesis there? I can't
Oh,
remember.
they do. Oh, on alone or out in
Yeah,
Siberia?
yeah, on Alone.
On alone, it was a Wolverine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was a Wolverine.
Wolverine's showing up, which they always told me about in Siberia. Like, oh man, when a Wolverine shows up, it's gonna ruin our whole trapping season. But in the 5 years I was there, I never had to run in with one. So they must not be as many out there as there are in Canada. I knew they were there, but you just don't expect it. Wasn't like in the top of my consciousness. I was
Well, a
definitely
Wolverine.
expecting to have some bear run-ins and was eagerly awaiting them, but there were, surprisingly no bear, but Wolverine
Say when a
on
when a
my spot.
Wolverine is infringing upon your livelihood of a trap line, they probably don't last very long, I would assume.
Yeah, I know. I think that's what happens over there. Yeah, I think they get trapped out pretty fast. So they are cool animals, so that's unfortunate. But yeah, like you said, it's people's definitely livelihood. So it's like the only time of year they make any money, so they got to make it happen.
Yeah. So you how long were you in Siberia for?
5 years over the course of 10 years, so I'd
Okay.
go to Russia for a year and then I'd come back and earn money and then go back over and kind of do that. And, sometimes I go for 6 months, come back for 6 months. It's kind of over. I don't know how many trips I took, but I think it was about 5 years over the course of a 10-year from basically when I was 22 to 32 or something.
So when you were in Siberia and you were with, I believe, with the Evenki people, when
Uh-huh.
you would leave and come back stateside or go back to Russia and then go back to Siberia, were you always going back to the same group of people, or were you kind of?
So more or less. So the first time I went over to that guy Justice, and then I would go over and to the neighboring village, because I made connections there. So I'd always go there first and kind of visit them. Then I'd go up north to Ura, the fur trapper, and then basically from his house go out to the natives in the forest. And yeah, I'd always go back to them. That was usually the goal of where I was going, but I'd usually hop my way there from you got to go visit everybody, it
Yeah.
takes a while. And even the trip out there, you can imagine, it's a few days on the Trans-Siberian Railway and then a plane ride and boat ride and a helicopter ride and a reindeer ride, and it's anyway elaborate trips. But
So when you would go from, I think I'm trying to keep everybody straight here, but from Yura, and then you'd pop off into the more native. I don't know if does
right.
village count? I mean, are there? I think they're. Is it nomadic or is
No,
it?
no. Well, so they have there's probably about 5 or 6 groups of nomadic folks that kind of circle around this one native village,
Okay.
and so they'll go back to that village occasionally, but for the most part they're out in the forest being nomads.
So were
And
you? Was it hard to get? I guess the trust and I don't know if respect is the
well,
word, but
that
to
was
get
why it
the
was nice
trust
because
in those villages.
it yeah, it went really organically, I guess, because I lived with that Russian guy that had been in prison with Yura, and they introduced me with the full vouch of like, oh, this guy's great, da da da. And then I went up to the fur trapper and did the same thing, worked with him and lived with him, and we really got along well and helped each other out. And then so when he dropped me off, oh, there's a bunch of turkeys right there. Jeez. Um,
If it's turkey season and you need to put your phone down,
Shoot, I might have to go get my bow.
just say
They are
if you
very
haven't filled
close.
your turkey tag, you can we can
Yeah.
pick this up later if we need to.
Anyway, those lucky little fellers can continue on. The Anyway, yeah. So then it just happened again where that fur trapper Venki guy took me out to his cousins, who were all the nomads, and was basically like, "Hey, this guy's awesome, They take him in, and so immediately they just took me in, kind of like like you would if your brother brought someone out and was like, "Hey, this is a good friend of mine. Take him in." And so then they became fast friends, and would take me out on all their adventures and hunts. And I think they liked having me around because I was a hard worker and did a lot of projects for them and stuff. So I think it was mutually beneficial. And yeah, it was really good. I consider them friends. It's and as vice versa. So it's
Were
yeah, crazy
they
place over there though.
were they speaking Russian or Evenki or both? Like, did you?
They mostly speak Russian. The older people, there's still some older people that don't speak any Russian, and but it's one of those things where like between the old generation and the kids, it's like the old people speak mostly Evenki, people our age speak half and half, and the young kids speak just Russian.
Gotcha.
uh, and so it's kind of losing fast. It goes really fast if they don't. Actually, I heard Jose say this when you talk to him, but it's very true. Like their language is really well suited for the forest and for reindeer husbandry and all that, but it doesn't work very well in village life. Uh, so they end up just gets replaced with Russian. Because
Yeah.
basically, if you go to a village and look at anything, it's like there's no Evenki words for any of this stuff. It's all Russian words, so they just switch over to Russian. And if you're out in the forest, that's where I don't know Evenki, but I got familiar with it enough that I was like, oh, that's really cool, because it was such a forest language that you can, for example, tell your way directions through the forest really accurately in a way you couldn't in English or Russian or something, where it's like they have a special word for a type of forest that has, red on the ground and a lot of tamarack trees, and
Hmm.
so you can kind of and a different type of word for all these different types of forest, and you can accurately tell directions and stuff through the forest in a way you couldn't otherwise. Similarly with reindeer, they have so many words for reindeer, with every word meaning some different variation and this and that. And so it's really quick and efficient and good in that context, but not as much outside of that context. So
Yeah. How do you describe a
anyway.
snowmobile? Fast reindeer, loud reindeer,
Yeah, totally.
fast and loud reindeer.
Exactly. Boomstick, you get all
Yeah, yeah.
those lost in translation.
Well, it's funny. So
Yeah.
I speak Spanish, and this is like
Uh-huh.
nowhere near a proper correlation, but I've noticed in Spanish it's actually for me. I mean, not anymore because I haven't used it in a decade, but It was a lot
Uh-huh.
easier for me to express feeling and emotion and describe certain things in Spanish even than English because it's
Interesting,
there's
yeah.
so much more precision to the language than kind of the broad strokes that English throws on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I was, yep. Similarly, Russian was fascinating to learn. That's such a, so foreign to English. It has developed so differently. And it was interesting to learn a language that you feel like is, well, that's actually richer. You can
Yeah.
express things in a, more richly than you can in English, which is a weird thing to think about if you only know one language. It's hard to imagine. But yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
so for those listening, just go learn another language really quick and then come back and then this will all make way more sense.
You got to live in a. I would have never learned Russian from a book. You have to be immersed, uh, unless you're, you know, really gifted in that. but yeah, it would have been, especially Russian would have been really tough out of just workbooks and stuff. So you go over there, spend a few years. I think that was learning the language was, it was pretty miserable because I was in a remote Russian village. Nobody spoke English. So I felt really isolated. Because that was, for a year chunks of time, basically as long as it takes to learn the language. I remember laying in bed just thinking, man, I wouldn't wish this on anybody. I feel so like isolated. So,
Yeah.
it's just tough. It really put it again into perspective going on alone. I specifically remember them. I think it was day 66 or something that came out there. So, oh, it's been 66 days. How do you feel? And I just like, man, 66 days. That's only like 2 months. If I go home now, it's like I just remember if I go home now, I ask everybody what's new. They'll be like, oh, nothing. It's like, oh, well, I shouldn't have come back.
And at
So
that
I
point, the
think
producers realized
having
that
those
they'd
like,
made a mistake. This dude's gonna be out here
yeah.
forever.
I think that having that long, year-long perspectives and stuff kind of, because I'd go for a year, and of course I would miss my family and miss all the people that I love, and you'd have all the, if you anyway, I learned over time that, yeah, that those relationships can withstand that, and that, you're going out, spending time, and bringing something back in that makes those relationships even richer and stuff. So it's actually, you can embrace those period of times. But yeah, I will say I was expecting it to go a lot longer. So I think it was a good perspective to have. The good
Yeah.
Lord prepared me, I guess.
So what so with all the adventures and the fun you were having in Siberia, I mean not that you're home permanently because I'm assuming you're not kind of whatever home is, I'm sure you're not going
hmm
to go back there at some point, but what was it that
hmm
made you say, all right, maybe it's time to focus more time stateside or to
Yeah.
not be spending so much time in Siberia?
Yeah, it kind of naturally happens because so I got married. I met one of my trips back from the States, was at a wedding and, met somebody that was pretty cool. And they ended up staying in touch. And then I went back to Russia. That was again one of those just little experiments of course, right when you quote unquote whatever fall in love with somebody, you're just like you want to be around them all the time. And but then I went back to Russia. So it was like one of those good experiments in okay, we can delayed gratification, I guess. And then so we met and stayed in touch while I was back in Russia, and then I came back, and it was a really good way to get to know somebody because you over email and stuff, you just communicate a lot, talk about a lot of things, and so it was pretty clear when I got back pretty quickly that we were going to get married, and then so we did, and then my wife came back to Siberia with me that winter, so she came over with the natives and spent a winter with us, and that was actually the coldest winter that I had been in Russia. So props to her. And in a teepee, almost got close to -60 out Fahrenheit,
Goodness
and
gracious.
so she toughed it out. And it's also of course she didn't know the language, so she had all that all those trials that I had gone through prior when you're isolated and learning the language and in somebody else's home and culture. It's just difficult. And so she kind of went through all that while we were out there. Also, it was also could see that it is a traditional culture and traditional society in that, for me as a dude, it was just awesome. I just hunt and fish and, go go out and catch reindeer and ride them around and all explore. But it's a little tougher for the women because they mostly, there's exceptions, but a lot of times they're back at the teepee and they're taking care of the kids and they're, cooking and doing things that aren't quite as adventurous or whatever. So, my wife, who just went in Rome. So so I think it was a little harder on her in a way. And we could, and we thought about it. Like we came back, we went home and then came back and spent another summer there too. So we spent a good amount of time there. But then when my wife was pregnant with our first kid, we came back to the States and then life kind of takes over. We want to go back. We did. We always have. But we had one kid, then you have another kid, and then now we have three kids,
And then a
it's
20-hour
all
train
pretty.
ride into Siberia
And
doesn't
now it's
sound
all
fun
of a sudden,
anymore.
it's not like a couple grand for me to go over anymore. Now it's like 10 grand. You're like, oh
Yeah.
man. And so it gets a little bit out of your control. It's still something I really want to do, and maybe in the future there'll be a way to, uh, now that I have a following of some sort, that I could help offset some of the costs by maybe bringing some other people over or filming or whatever it might be. And so I still fully intend to go back over. We
So
were going
I
to go
guess
this fall actually, but COVID kind of stopped that. So
ended that. So I guess we could say
yeah,
45 minutes in, if people don't know that Jordan did win alone, so that might have
yeah.
allowed for at least one trip. Um,
Yeah, totally,
so
totally. Yeah, we haven't blown it all yet, so we might be able to scrape up a few grand if
I guess how about that? 45 minutes in, and this is the first time we've mentioned winner or last man standing, whatever that is. That a record for you? I guess I'm sure that probably comes up pretty quick normally.
Yeah, that's a record for sure. So you're doing great.
So your wife, I mean, she obviously knew somewhat of what she was getting into. I saw another thing that, you had neglected to mention that reindeer love people pee, and there was some there was some stuff you might have left out. But did
I
she
definitely have.
did she come from? I mean, from an advent. I mean, is she just a trooper or? It's interesting. I didn't expect. I should have expected this. I just didn't think about it. When you try and do a podcast about people that decide to live a certain lifestyle, even if it's someone that has a normal 9 to 5 or whatever, so far to a person, you all live a very specific type of lifestyle, and that has basically meant that either internet's good and cell service is bad, or cell service is good and internet's bad, or I don't have internet, or and so it's
The first thing you'll notice when you go spend a lot of time in the woods is that, man, I don't miss the internet at all.
right.
It just doesn't become as much of a factor.
So I mean, thankfully, even with all the interesting nature of of how to get these podcasts to actually happen, this is the first time we've dropped something. And so maybe that means that Jordan is living the most wild, extreme out there. I don't know. Um,
Yeah, I'm hanging off a cliff right now, just in a
I,
downpour. It's crazy.
either that or his iPhone just had a heart attack. I don't know.
My iPhone 13 glitched
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
So, anyways, where we were is I was just asking. So, your wife, was she? I mean, did she come from a similarly adventurous background? I mean, did she start as a
Well,
just a
she
trooper? I
grew
mean,
up
how did
with,
that? You seem like a
yeah, she's mostly, she, yeah, she's a trooper for sure, in that she grew up in New York. So she's born in Japan, then they came to the States when she was really young. That she's, uh, grew up in New York City kind of, and, uh, yeah, wasn't really exposed to the outdoors much. She was adventurous. So when she was, able, she went to China and spent a couple years in China because she's part Chinese, so her heritage. She wanted to go meet like who was left of her family over there and see what Chinese life was like. And so she went over there, yeah, for a couple of years. She backpacked across Europe. She did some adventurous stuff, but never anything particularly outdoorsy. So that was all jumping in the deep end for sure. She did great. Although it's unquestionably hard. It's not like it's easy, but she did great and enjoys it, and we continue to have that as a big part of our life. So it's good, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that's neat. And how long had you and your wife been together, I guess, when you went on alone?
That's maybe about 3 years would be my guess. I haven't thought about that exactly, but yeah. Oh no, it's a little more than that. It was like 5 years. Sorry. Yeah, yeah.
You mean that Joe Rogan didn't
So
ask you that question?
yeah, he
Yes.
missed all kinds of stuff. A real slouch when it comes to podcasting.
um,
No, yeah, no, he didn't, and yeah, it was about 5 years, and that was good. I've heard, I think it was Britt or somebody talk about it, but when on your interview with him, but that you don't want any big skeletons in your closet when you're out there, and that everything is going to come up, which is indeed true. I noticed that even fur trapping and stuff. You just think about the most random people and situate anything that could have been a loose end that you could have tied, even if it wasn't a big deal. It's somewhere in your brain down there, and it'll pop back up and say, "Oh man, I should have called that guy and told him I appreciated him," or I should have. So like, if even those little things are popping up, like if you have some serious issues, that they will definitely come out. There's no avoiding it, no matter how busy you try to keep. And so, uh, it was good going out there that I had, full trust in our relationship. We have a really good relationship, and that makes a huge difference. And as I think they said, it's it can be hard on people's relationships. Probably, I know for Jana Lee, it was a really tough few months but for one, there was just a stress of not knowing how your husband's doing, if he's wasting away, if he's having major psychological changes. And then on the other hand, at home it's tough because his car breaks down and the kids are sick. They're basically sick the whole time. And then we have all these nice furs that the Evenki people had given us, boots and things like that. And at one point, the mobs got to him. So of course, everything that goes wrong could go
yeah.
wrong. So we joke now about like that she lost more weight than I did, which actually is true.
Oh my gosh. Did she
And
really?
so it was like, yeah, like it was really tough for her. And um, but at the same time, like on a deep level, I think she was worried about not knowing what I was going through, and that like, is he gonna change? Is it like, because that's something that happens. But that wasn't actually something that I was worried about. So that was also not a stressor that I had to deal with, that she did have to deal with. Because when you're out there, you're experiencing it, so you know what you're going through. So it's
Yeah.
it's not an unknown. And yeah, so I think just all those unknowns are tough in conjunction with the day to day. So no doubt it was hard for her, but she made it through. And then I could see, fortunately for me, like, and I don't mean this in any like arrogant way at all, but it wasn't like the hardest thing I'd ever done, or it wasn't like life-changingly difficult. I felt like it felt really similar to Russia, honestly. I came back, and it was this, a couple days after. I didn't have to wait after the show ended and stay. I didn't have to stay at production and get healthy again or anything. So it was just a couple days after the show was over, I was back home, and I literally just felt just like another trip back from Russia. So
Yeah, that's what I was
you get your
gonna.
friends around, you get together, you chat and hang out, and just get back right into life. Check the news. I think that's I think the right interval to check the news. It's the right news cycle, about 80 days.
Once every 80, 90 days. Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of twice every couple, every hour.
Yeah. So I mean,
No, anyway, but
so for you, I mean, it
I think it
was,
was
you knew what to expect of yourself, right? Like you'd
right. I know.
done,
It's all unknown for me in a way. I mean,
yeah,
there's huge stressors and big unknowns, but they're not like existential. But for the people back home, it is like, man, you just don't know what that person's going through. Your mind's going to be going crazy, especially if you're, inclined at all towards being stressed out. It's just like, man, that's a lot to deal with.
yeah. I mean,
That's the big deal.
had you done any? I mean, I don't know how to define major, so I'll just use the word and you can define it. Had you
Hmm.
done any major like solo trips or away from home trips, since you'd been married before alone, or was this kind of the first time that your family had gotten to experience that
Yeah,
aspect
not
of?
not nothing like that long at all. Like I'd go away and do jobs for, a week at a time, or do this or that. It was like you definitely you leave for weeks at a time, but I don't think there wasn't anything I had done that would it wasn't such a big event. Like
But no, like
if
long
you go,
term, no
yeah,
communication type of a deal.
no communication at all. Yeah, so you don't really. No, I hadn't done anything where there was just no communication. Although my trips to Russia were like that, and when my wife had come with me to Russia, there had been some hairy situations in the woods that were cause for lots of stress. So, I broke some ribs when I was out there at one point, and, wrestling some reindeer, and I broke them pretty bad to where, like, I wasn't sure if I was like, man, if it gets any worse than this, I don't think I'm gonna be able to breathe. And it was pretty borderline. There's no helicopter or anything we could call, so it was. She had dealt with some stressors with me, and some injuries and this and that. So I think she probably also, her imagination ran wild on that, because that's definitely been a learned trait, is to try to be careful out in the woods and stuff. It's not something that came naturally to me. I've gotten hurt a bunch and had surgeries and this and that, and so she probably was, you expect the worst in a way. I think all that it's just a level of underlying stress, and then on top of it, you've got the kids screaming and all the day to day. I think it's just pretty difficult. And then that goes, like you said, largely unsung. So yeah, especially for the people at home. Again, like we were talking about, when you're out there, you kind of know what you're going through, so it's not really a concern.
Yeah.
And back home, you're like, I just kind of put my trust. I know my wife can handle it, and uh, things are going to be fine. And I kind of err on that side of things in my thought process generally. So for my own mental well-being, I guess that's an advantage, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that's the
Yeah,
case.
that's kind of the yeah, and yeah, it's a challenge, right? I think I think for
Mhm.
me, I tend to do the same thing whenever I'm gonna go do X, Y, or Z. And thankfully, now
Mhm.
with modern technology, I can take my Garmin inReach and I can be in the middle of nowhere,
Right.
and
Right.
I have to wait 15 minutes to get a text in or out, which is just terrible. But you can
Right.
know, right, if something's going wrong.
Right.
But for me, I'm the same way. I'm like, oh, it'll all work out. It'll be fine. No big deal. But
Yeah.
I think that tends to leave people feeling unheard or ununderstood, and that's kind of a challenge to try
Yeah, and
and
then you get
juggle.
back. Like, I thought about that when I got back. Like, I was really glad that I felt fine. I was normal. I actually think I weighed myself the other day. I was lighter now than I was when I got off the show. So it's like I was just no, totally fine, normal, mentally the same person. Everything was fine except, uh, oh shoot, I've lost my train of thought right in the middle of that. Yeah, oh well, maybe
Just
we'll
talking
come
about
back.
how
But
the how sometimes the other person doesn't feel. For me, I was saying the other person doesn't maybe feel
oh yeah, so
heard
then
or
you get back. I
understood,
was
and
really
then
thankful that
yeah,
you never know how it's going to go. Everybody that goes hunting, you go out there, you don't know if you're going to get something or not, and all the more on a situation like alone, you can have all your skills, all your ducks in a row and all that, but there's still just a level of unknown out there, and so I'm really thankful that it went well, and then that I could come back and jump right back in and help support my wife. Because if I came back like a physical wreck or like mentally completely changed or something, and then your wife has to not only bear that burden while you were gone, but then somehow pick you up,
Yeah, for
like
6 months
that's just
after
like
she's trying to
that's
scrape you
too
off the
much.
floor.
Yeah, it's like that's just it's asking a little too much of one person, and and that's the type of trial that she would have to go through to completely unsung, like it's like then the shows come out and you get all this attention and praise and this and that, and meanwhile she's like taking out your bedpan and doing all the day to day. So anyway, yeah, I could see how
Charging you
that could
50
be a
bucks
real
per bedpan.
yeah,
Honey, I
totally.
love you, but that's another 50.
Totally. Yeah. So no, it's I could see that being real hard, not just while you're gone, but even coming back if then she has a whole nother thing to pick up.
Yeah. Well, and
So
I
yeah.
mentioned this with Britt too, and um, I told Britt this wasn't a pitch, but I mean, if this is a pitch, maybe you can take it that way. But another thing that, early on, I think before I had even recorded episode 1 with Justin, something that I was really
Mhm.
interested in doing was talking to that significant other, for those that had
Mhm.
someone at home in that fashion, and for those that have maintained having that person home in that fashion.
Mhm.
Because I mean, the stories, from you are obviously interesting, but there's the same and
Yeah.
equal, for that person that stayed home. And I think that would be such an interesting thing to hear and to understand, and for people to kind of like, oh wow, like, I didn't think about that aspect, of like, for example, you mentioned the moths getting to the furs, right? So there's this stress of like, not
Mhm.
only is Jordan gone and not only is all of this happening, and he could be half dead at this point in time, and who knows, but then he's going to come home and these furs that he has prized and loved forever have holes in them and they're not taken care of. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, like that's the type of
Right.
stuff that you would never think of and that you would never
Yeah.
hear, but that's like a real part of the show, really, and a real part of the
Yeah, for
existence, right?
sure. Yeah, it's true. It makes me think of all the, like broader than the show too. It's like when it makes me think of, mothers and stuff always go through that where they're just at home, the unsung work of dealing with the kids, if
Yep.
that's what they're doing, or fathers that are at home, whatever it is. But then you got the like we were talking about earlier, then those native cultures where it's like, yeah, this is the kind of there is that whole unsung aspect of life that just the day to day stuff that everyone has to do. But
Yeah, like right now, right? There's two spouses right now that are taking care of a bunch of unruly kids while the two of us get to talk, right? So even in this very conversation, we're creating that exact same dynamic. But
yeah.
for you, you mentioned that you weren't a hunter at a young age, and now later in
Mhm.
life you've come to that, and certainly, on
Mhm.
on your Facebook page, for those that are following your Jordan Jonas fan page, um, we can see that you do hunt now, and it seems like you're
Mhm.
probably doing, more of the backcountry style hunting. And so has that
No, yeah.
been, how is that? Because it's kind of the same dynamic, right? I don't know if you have
So that's what
an
I.
inReach or
Oh
something
yeah, that's what
similar,
I
but
like. What's good is I'm so think the great thing that's been allowed by winning this show is that it gave me freedom, and you kind of get and it's an opportunity to assess your priorities. Everybody that goes on the show, of course, so they know that family and time with your family and your kids while they're little is all super valuable, and getting a big chunk of money like that is really advantageous for. That's what I felt like I was doing out there. I was like, if I lose 60 or 90 or 140 days out here, that's all. If I can pull it off and win, then it's like it's all I'm just buying time later with the kids. So
yeah, you've more
this
than paid
160
yourself
days
back
will
on
be
that.
nothing. Yeah,
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 already you've already paid yourself
exactly.
back.
Right. And that's what I try to do is like uh use that as as an opportunity to spend more time with my kids now, especially when they're young and stuff. So because I can do that, then it also helps support my wife and stuff, so she's not just on her own with the kids all the time. That way, when I do want to go like up in the woods for a week or something, it's not that big of a deal because it's not like she's already been, well, whatever. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's helpful in that I think, and that is how I like to hunt. I don't, I got into hunting in Siberia just with the natives, and then I, did a lot of it back, pretty much haven't bought meat since, just go back to Virginia and hunt a bunch of deer, a bear here and there, whatever it is.
The
And then,
5 whitetail limit,
uh,
whatever it is.
yeah, so it's amazing. Wonderful stuff. And then, uh, but I really enjoy like backcountry bow hunting and stuff. I get, I don't like to run into other people. So if I have to go 10 miles back into the wilderness to start hunting, I'll do that, And so, yeah, I like that backcountry hunting and try to do a bunch of it. This has been the worst year because we moved right during hunting season. So, poor planning
I
and
say I think that's called
yeah,
bad
so I'm
planning.
bad planning. Yeah, nobody to blame but myself for that one. Oh, look at these turkeys. They're just all over. I can almost grab one. I can go grab my bow.
Like I said, if we need to put this on pause, and you need to go,
Just kidding. At least
or we could have the
anyway, I should
first
go tell the
podcast
kids.
recorded turkey hunt. I guess we could do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Another one. Take that, Joe. You never shot a turkey
Hold
on
on
your
one
podcast.
second. Let me knock on the window, make sure the kids are looking at. Did they leave? Oh, the car's gone. Never mind.
Oh, that's funny.
They must have gone somewhere.
So when
Yeah.
you're doing backcountry stuff now, have you purchased any technology that allows you to communicate with your family while you're out, or do you
Yeah, so I
still?
have a Garmin inReach
Yeah,
also, and that's totally helpful. And yeah, that's great.
yeah,
I use that. And then yeah, yeah. So
that's cool.
sorry, I just ran in the house really quick. And yeah, they're gone. Okay, never mind. um, but yeah, so I use the Garmin inReach. That's super helpful, and yeah, it's just one of those things. I do those courses now in the summer, so that ends up being the last couple of years. I've spent a good portion of the summer up in the woods, so that is again kind of putting it back on the wife, and so.
And this
But
is
it's nice
a
to be able to be in touch.
this is a good time to kind of transition into that. So you said you're teaching in courses, and so what are you up to now? And where can people find you? And are you teaching courses that people can sign up for and come hang out with Jordan for a little while?
Yeah, I've been doing some backcountry courses out of Montana. Sometimes we go up into Idaho, sometimes here. And you can go on my website at jordanjonas.com. I have more details up, and I also, post a lot on Instagram and update there as an email list. And they've been awesome. They've been such a good time, and I think it's been really valuable for people to, it's not very often that some people get to unplug for a week and go up in the wilderness and, fish and learn stuff that's real practical and just, get to know each other. And so this year I don't have the schedule out yet because there's like a lot of moving parts next year. And so I'm going to try to get that out as soon as possible. But as is, the best way to know when that schedule will come out is just by following on Instagram probably, or checking it out on my website. But
Cool, and I'll link
yeah,
your
definitely.
Instagram and your website obviously in the show notes here, and then for those,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so those that are interested can go find those there. But what kind of courses do you teach? Like, what kind of stuff are you teaching?
Well, they're high mountain wilderness courses. So we'll either backpack or ride horses way back into the wilderness. And you know, teach people how to make their own fishing gear on the spot out of, junk we find, or sticks and this and that. We kind of use I kind of like to follow the alone, like make what we can out of paracord and some basic items. And basically we'll, I keep it pretty open ended, because that's one of the things I appreciate the most about life in the wilderness, is that it's not super scheduled, and it's not uh sorry, I got anyway, watching the turkeys, I got a little distracted. But it's like it's not super scheduled. It's something like that, like, oh, if hypothetically we had a turkey tag or something, it's like, oh, when turkeys walk by, we could hunt and process a turkey. Or, last year we had some elk come in, and we called in the elk real, within bow shot of ourselves, so just show people how to do that. Or definitely fishing those high mountain lakes is a big part of what we do, and hiking, exploring, learning the land, learning the resources that are available up there, and try to keep it simple but not completely primitive. I like to have, I just think the most practical, living with the Evenki, you kind of see what is really practical and what is kind of more like hobbyish or more fun, and neither is better than the other. But I like to kind of stick to the practical stuff. Like, what are you going to really use if you're in the back country and you need to make a go at it? Like, uh, uh,
So you're not teaching people
so
how to
anyway, I
sit
just
in
try to,
one like square mile and starve for 90 days.
yeah, exactly. Like, I want to like show people that, like, hey, dude, it's a big part of what I want to show, is that like this can be rich land if you, like, when you get up there, you actually get shocked at the start sometimes, because like, oh, I don't see as much wildlife as I thought we would, or like, uh, and whether that be wolves everywhere or whatever it is, it's just like, oh, there's not that much game. But then once you like start spending a few days there, it's like, oh, I'm noticing all these squirrels over here. I'm noticing, like, or there's that lake that we didn't catch anything out of initially, but now we've built a raft and gone out there and found a hole, and, catching nice big fish now. Or, just kind of teaching people to have an open mind, be adaptable, and learn to view the wilderness as a place where you can potentially thrive and live well, and not just, yeah, exactly, starve, or, at least you can't learn it all in 5 or 6 days, but you definitely can get a window into it, and hopefully for some people that sparks an interest that they can just carry on and uh build upon. And so much of it is just having the time to like disconnect, go up there and learn things while you're also in a beautiful wild place. There's a lot of cool stuff that goes on.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Food.
Kind of, like Jose, he mentioned that, it takes a couple days to get into it, and once, so that's cool that your classes are a longer format, right? So people can have that
Yeah,
opportunity
that's a
of
big part of
of
what you
detoxing,
can
and
learn
then
this. Exactly. You can learn skills online and stuff, a lot of stuff. Some of them aren't that useful, but, and so just knowing what's good and what's not is valuable. But even more importantly, yeah, just you need enough time up there to tap into something a little bit deeper, which definitely is there, and it's really cool. And when people do that, and I've been shocked, not shocked necessarily, but I've been really happy and pleased with how valuable it's been for people. I think it's necessary.
yeah.
Especially if you haven't found yourself without your phone for more than a week, in the last 10 years, it might be time to do something like that.
Yep. Well, are you keeping your YouTube channel up to date, or is that another place people can
Yeah,
find
I
you?
do. Sometimes I throw some stuff up there. I haven't hit it really hard. Just I haven't quite. It's one of those things. I have a lot of stuff that I feel like would be really cool to put up. Um, but I also don't want to turn my life into like content making.
Yeah.
Like when people are hanging out and all of a sudden it's like, whoop, camera comes
Oh, let
out
me get my
and
camera. This is cool.
yeah,
Hey, can
so
you
I'm
say that
trying
thing
to
again, please?
avoid
Can you do
that.
that one more time? Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think, it might be something I pursue more a little bit in the future. Right now it's pretty simple, but I don't want to do that yet, especially with we've had a baby and stuff. He's starting to get to a little older to where we have more freedom, but
Cool.
we'll see what I do with it. I'm not sure, but I do put out some videos. The last stuff I was doing was just reviews of the episodes of this last season of Alone, but there's old stuff on there that's actually pretty interesting with living with the Evenki, and I had a camera during a lot of that time, so some poor quality footage, but unique footage. And I think that's all worth watching if for people that are interested. And then, yeah, we'll see in the future. I did do a big family trip this summer. We went for a couple of weeks with the kids way up in the woods, 20 miles back in basically. And I got some cool footage and did some lessons. And I'll see if I put those out at some point when I get them ready or something. But got some good footage somewhere.
uh, it's a good thing. It's a good thing History
you
Channel
know.
doesn't give you all that footage because you wouldn't do anything with it.
Totally.
You'd sit on it
Have a
just like
huge hard
them.
drive. That would be great. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. Here I am judging others.
all right. Well, Jordan, this has been super fun. I don't think I've heard another person laugh as much as I've heard you laugh. So I thank you for that. And before we wrap up, I guess, do you have any last things you want to say? Anything you want to just kind of share and get out there? Or anything that we need to correct, or just anything else?
Not really. It's fun chatting, and everybody listening appreciate it, and yeah, wish you luck
Okay.
as
Well,
you get more people on here and stuff, and it's been fun. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate you and your willingness to spend time with me and to share your stories. So just thank you so much, and you have a great rest of your day.
All right, you, Sam. Later.
Yep. Bye.